idea of race has perpetuated ignorance in the minds of the masses for millennia. What is race? Black and white? Yellow and brown? Or far more complex than what we've been taught to think? When someone refers to a white person, are they referring to a Caucasian or a European? When someone refers to a black person, are they referring to a Negro or African? Each one of these so-called classifications is an indoctrinated establishment of social disposition based upon the false concept of race and color. Take Kamala Harris, for example, who is ethnically a Caucasian woman but can socially pass for black, and does so. On the opposite end of the spectrum, anyone of a lighter skin and so-called European admixture can easily pass for white. Yet all of these terms are inaccurate and misleading. Caucasian doesn't mean white any more than Negro means black. Dark-skinned Mongoloids and Caucasians exist, as well as fair-skinned Negroes. Although one would be extremely hard-pressed to find a light-skinned Australoid, if an Australoid male had pale skin, he would resemble an archaic European. So the idea of a dark-skinned European isn't far-fetched from a genetic or anthropological standpoint. The main features that differentiate the Australoid from the European are the wider jaw, the wider nose, the deeper eye set, and the prominent brow ridge, and of course, skin color. Whereas the Melanesian and Negrito groups in the Pacific more closely resemble so-called Negroes, but surprisingly have the least relation to them, and have the highest amounts of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. The groups in Oceania are some of the oldest and most genetically isolated in the world. They are also the genetic personification of what a Caucasian once resembled. Taking this into mind, the assertion that race and color should be used synonymously is asinine. Equally as asinine would be to label an African as black or a European as white. Race is a direct result of bloodline, and color has been used to conflate the truth. In terms of anthropology, the race labeled as white is an extremely brand new so-called race of people. Even using the inflated chronology of academia that includes millions of years for Australopithecus to evolve into modern human, the inception of the so-called white race materialized overnight in comparison. According to the accepted history of pigmentation in Eurasia, the origin of both light skin and blue eyes is south of the Caucasus, more specifically in modern-day Iran, former Mesopotamia. While blonde hair originated as a Siberian feature. It must be noted that blue eyes originated thousands of years before light skin, as stated in the outline. The ancient race of France had dark skin and blue eyes. The ancient Baltic races had dark skin and blue or variable eyes, while many more of these people were considered swarthy with light-colored eyes. Light or white skin came later as a result of artificial selection. According to genetic studies, pale skin is a result of several waves of selective breeding. Cited in a number of academic journals, pale skin comes as a result of interbreeding between a small, finite group of people from south of the Caucasus and Anatolia, who then migrated into the surrounding areas. Additionally, this information stands directly in the face of the generally accepted school of thought, which states skin tone and UV radiation based upon geographic latitude act as the dominant factor in skin complexion. Because if the latter were completely true, one should have expected the white race to come out of Scandinavia or even Antarctica rather than Mesopotamia. In reality, this model shows the creation of one people and the removal of another in a relatively short amount of time. The term white person did not exist in Europe, Asia, Africa, or even pre-Columbian America. The term white came about in the late 1600s as a method of differentiation between indentured servants and slaves from the general populace. White became a term of classification, meaning European and free. European meaning one of several sovereign nationalities, indistinguishable by skin color. The meaning of free being indistinguishable by skin color as well. This white mysticism stands at the foundation of world deception. Many of those so-called lauded white faces of royalty from world history are anything but. And the desolate face of slavery in Eurasia was exclusively white, as the Caucasus is the headquarters of world slavery. So by the time of the first conquistadors, this racial transition still had not taken place, but was under progressive transformation over the following centuries to come. The colonization of the Americas ran contemporaneous with the Renaissance period in Europe. The Renaissance followed the Middle Ages, and the fall of the Middle Ages can best be described as a massive transformation in the demographics of Europe. Ironically named the Black Death, was the leading cause of this massive change in European demographic, which it is said that over 75 to 200 million died as a result of this human-enabled plague. As maintained by the leading evolutionary epidemiologists, the origin of the Black Plague hails from either Crimea in modern-day Ukraine or the Genoese-Italian slave ships that traveled from Atlantic coast to Black Sea coast, carrying infected rats whose parasitic fleas were the incubators for the bubonic plague. This was actually the second collapse of the Middle Ages. The Great Famine of 1315 already had an extremely overcrowded Europe struggling to maintain survival. It is estimated that as much as 25% of the entire population of Europe died during this time preceding the Black Death. Continuous precipitation and wet conditions rendered the land unharvestable, and the people were rendered to cannibalism. Between these two calamities, the famine and the plague, Europe was ripe for a drastic change in demographics. The art of the Renaissance reflected this drastic change in demographic by manufacturing works of art that were said to be a rebirth or rediscovery of classical antiquity. Apparently, before the Renaissance, The art of drawing with perspective and even the ability to make concrete had either been long forgotten or recently discovered. In truth, the Renaissance period transpired as a consummation for the rebranding of European and world history. During this time, so-called new advances were introduced to the public, mainly by the Italians, through art, mathematics, philosophy, science, astronomy, and even naval technology. The Renaissance in Europe is a first-hand outcome of the Age of Discovery, led by the Portuguese and Spanish by way of Italy into the falsely attributed New World. The concept of race based upon color is void at this moment. We can only surmise that over the span of time between the Middle Ages and the year 1700, a people arose with distinguishably white European characteristics. At no point earlier in the accepted historical narratives across the world have any people been characterized as such. If such a people did exist, they existed in complete isolation from the entire world until after the Age of Discovery. Which means that many of the American lands conquered by so-called white men were actually subdued by darker races, and white people came later. It was only around the year 1700 did this qualification define itself in a way as to not compromise the identity of the classically accepted European. Under whatever circumstances, the conditions in Europe caused by the famine and plague facilitated the prospects for this specific group of people to spread throughout Europe, effectively supplanting the darker Europeans with their pale-skinned proto-cousins. The possibility lies well within the crosshairs of credibility that this race or type of people were purposely created by people of a darker race to execute a specific objective. The conditions needed to conceive this genetic grouping were well controlled, lending its nature to a source of artificial design, meaning this group was selected for and breeded against as recently as 500 years ago. So the application of the word white has no historical bearing that can be consistently established over a significant course of time. With this being said, the study of Torah as a means of tracing genealogy and identity is far more viable than the duplicitous world of modified knowledge, otherwise known as science. The areas of speculation have definable associations, in the words of Scripture. The families and territories in question have definable roots, according to the Word. So far, we've highlighted the territories of Japheth and Ham, and throughout our findings, we uncovered the ancient bloodlines responsible for ruling certain areas throughout Eurasia and Africa. In this episode, we uncover the lands of Shem through the investigation of migration, archaeology, anthropology, and genetics. First beginning with Canada and continuing down into South America, followed later by Central America and the Caribbean, and closing next episode with Mexico and the United States.
Mali Masi Ghana, Axum and Kush. Couple spots that gave me a push. Creek Apache, Navajo, Maya Paiute. Gave me the type of blood you cannot dilute. Don't mess with beats if I can find a loop. My history is a circle that you cannot dispute. Study Shaka Zulu, how he handled the troops. Broke everything that his enemy was planning to do. This ain't pride talking, I'm examining it too. Simple facts that some people can't handle the truth. Your genetics is a prophecy handed to you. Better deal with it before it starts handling you. And walk tall like you know it then. I study history, I know we got this shit on repeat. I know we got this shit on repeat. shit on repeat. I know you got the shit.
The line of Shem, otherwise known as the line of the blessed, is the most important lineage of all as it concerns the history of the Old Testament and the world. Within this lineage, the truth of identity threatens every foundation of academically accepted knowledge the world over. The fields of history, law, philosophy, science, and math even sit on the fringes of truth if the mysteries of the book are persistently studied and uncovered. The most simple context is lost if the knowledge is founded in wickedness or ignorance. And for this reason was the lineage of Shem so important. In simple, this ancestry was entrusted with the most vital responsibility of the sons of Noah: to maintain and uphold the true knowledge, history, and wisdom of the ages.